Greetings and welcome to Intro to Cognitive Science. I'm John Linstead and I'll be your professor this semester. So, let's get right into it. First, we'll start with a challenging question that can sort of help to frame a lot of what we talk about as we move forward. We'll then talk about what cognitive science actually is. We'll do a little bit of syllabus recapping, and I'll show you a little showcase of some interesting stuff from all over the science and the edges of cognitive science altogether. So, let's start with this challenging question. What are you? That's easy to come up with answers to, right? You're a person, an animal, you're alive, To start, you're a human, right? Maybe you're a person too on top of that. Maybe you're also a citizen, or maybe you're also a dancer. We can kind of climb back up the tree. You're a mammal? Sure. You're not a donkey, though. You're a vertebrate, animal, organism, all up to, way, way, way up. We're a physical object, but you are not a chair, right? So this is fine, right? This is a way of applying simple labels to give us an understanding of what we are in various ways. But here's where we start to dig a little deeper with cognitive science. What if I take the human that you are, and we section the human that you are? Am I still me if I'm just a head in a jar and I've lost my body? A lot of folks would say, sure. Your brain is probably where most of your you lives. Sure. Well, what about all the things that live within the human brain? You have a lot of stuff in there, a lot of functions, a lot of features in your brain. You have memories, all the different things you've experienced in your life. You have different skills that you've sort of built up over time. Some of them more physical, like riding a bike. Some of them more abstract, like learning to take good notes or whatever, right? A little bit distinct from your memories. In fact, sometimes we see that. You have your other ways you connect your experiences, the emotions that you have, your knowledge about what things are in the world and how things exist and what the logical relationships are between things. And you have your opinions, and everybody's got their opinions, of course. But, okay, so if these are the things that help make up what a human brain has to say about the world, what if we start losing some of these things? What if I lose all of these things? What's still there? Am I still me at the end of the day? This is the kind of question that sparks whole fields of philosophy. Rene Descartes, you might know from creating Cartesian coordinates, but that was his day job. He was also an extremely famous philosopher, Descartes. So Descartes' conundrum is along these lines. I know my eyes can be deceived. And he wasn't so great at it. I know all my other senses can be deceived. So how can I be sure that any of my world is real? And how can I be sure that I am real? What am I? And that's the key for him, for Descartes. This is where Descartes' meditations on what it is to be a thing that exists, a thinking thing, this is where it begins. I must exist because I am asking the question, what am I? Right? I must exist. And this, you may have heard, is cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But maybe a little more accurately and emphatically, I am capable of asking if I exist, therefore I must exist to be able to do the asking. This is a powerful thought. His insight is, thinking and the self are connected. They're these very important connected ideas. And we live this conscious experience that is also somehow this product of the thoughts that we have, the information that's moving around on the substrate of the physical brain. And our brain and our behavior and our cognition, these can all be examined, measured, and explored in different ways, focusing on different little pieces of the overall mind. And by exploring the mind, we can uncover its rules, and that is where we become a science. Cognitive science gives us the tools to do justice to answering that question of what am I? Or maybe more accurately, how am I? What am I? Less who, but where am I? Where are the different pieces of the mind? These are the ways that we can approach this very abstract and really kind of difficult, floaty thought of what am I as a science and not just a private meditation. So, what is cognitive science? Well, let's talk about what cognition is. My favorite take on what cognition is the idea that the world is this vast, complex, and chaotic thing. If you stop and just think about that, there's so much out there. There is so much uncountable, unfigure-outable stuff. And I'm not just talking about things at the edges of the universe and things that are too big for our reckoning, but just like the complexity of the world. There's so much happening. Even if you just zoom in on a leaf, you see an infinite space of microorganisms all mucking around, doing things. Given that the world is that complex and chaotic and messy, cognition is how life can rise to the challenge of navigating that complexity of the world. Cognition is what allows us to arrange our bodies in a way that can handle things like complex algebra, right? Or surviving in a wilderness scenario. Cognition is our ability to take information from the world and make sense of it and create rules and create thoughts to use. Now, if that's what cognition is itself, then cognitive science is this sort of the approach to thinking about what that process is, thinking about thinking. It's about digging into the mechanisms of mind. Cognition being, the thought, the information processing that we do. In some sects, there's a very specific cognition is the set of interconnected mechanisms that we employ to perceive, comprehend, and achieve action in the world. Okay, so what is science? You might not all know. It's the systematic investigation of nature. You may be used to thinking of this as like, science class, right? It's about nature. It's about systematically understanding the rules of nature by making testable predictions based on your past findings. So, the idea of cognitive science is a systematic study of the interconnected pieces of the mind. One big piece of the way that the field functions, though, is you think about the mind, it's a very complicated thing. It's, in fact, one of the most complicated things that we've ever come across in all of the cosmos. And to do that, you need to come at it from several angles. Very broadly speaking, the field is at least 6 different subfields all connecting together. They People disagree on exactly how many there are, but the idea is that you need an interdisciplinary approach. Cognitive science is that it is an interdisciplinary collection of sciences. They all ask overlapping and related questions. They often help inform one another. So you have questions of philosophy guiding how you investigate questions of psychology. You have computer science helping us understand AI, but also neuroscience, say deep learning, we've seen more and more of lately. Linguistics, we can see natural language processing, and questions of linguistics lead to questions, again, of philosophy. What is it to know something if all of my thoughts are guided by the language that I grew up in, right? You have so very many ways to combine the findings of these different fields to get at very interesting questions. Here's a larger map of... I actually quite like this as a cognitive scientist myself. It shows sort of the historical trajectory of different ideas throughout time that connect to cognitive science, things that are all within these different interdisciplinary segments. So we see that behaviorism begins in the 30s. We'll talk about behaviorism. Cognitivism becomes more key. You don't have to know all this stuff. But this helps chart the trajectory, and it helps to illustrate that it's not just a linear progression. Nothing in real science is a linear progression. It's all big, broad approaches that change over time. They fall out of favor for different reasons. Maybe the technology improves. Maybe some big findings show like, hey, this whole line of inquiry was not great. So this is just meant to show that even in the progression of this field, there is complexity. So again, this is a science that we are trying to systematize what it is to think about cognition. And I want to start by saying your brain is, again, freaking amazing. There's more connections between neurons in your brain than there are stars in the known universe. We can take information from the environment using our senses. We then can use language to communicate, but we can also think about what we're seeing. We can engage in symbolic thought, but also more or less defined lower level thought. There's a difference between how I would solve math and how I would learn to juggle. Those are two very different categories of behavior, but they share things, and they're both running on the brain. And we can activate our motor system to take action. These are all the basic pieces in and out. And that's what I really like about cognitive science. We get to, while we're pursuing cognitive science, the concept, we get to ask these very interesting questions about ourselves. How do we think? How do we actually process the information in the world around us? What kinds of behaviors does that produce in us? How do we react? And it's all staying close to these very philosophical questions about what it is to even be alive. So, if that doesn't spark your interest, then hopefully you'll come along for some of the more interesting, weird stuff. The robotics and the brain stuff. So, let's talk about the course agenda. There's a few goals here. The general approach is that we're going to give a survey of the history of how cognitive science develops into the full-fledged field that it is today. We'll also examine some of the different approaches and major findings, the kinds of stuff that are currently active, right? And the ways that major findings mark big changes as we proceed through what's known as the cognitive revolution in psychology and philosophy, leading to cognitive science proper. And we're also going to see lots of neat stuff that machines and humans do. We'll talk language, we'll talk machine learning. We'll talk neural networks, and all kinds of interesting stuff coming. But also, along the same lines, and it might not make sense just yet, but we're going to take a little dip into the very basics of programming. And some of the logical assumptions that connect to it, but also it just gives you a hands-on for investigating a system that processes information in very predictable ways, very much like the mind. So, your weekly expectations in this class should be mostly asynchronous. We have some optional synchronous stuff we can do, but essentially most of it will be lectures just like this, with quizzes attached. In fact, this one will also have a quiz. You'll have 2 to 3 of those every week. You'll have 0 to 1 programming exercises with video demos that I'll post to go with. And if you're worried up front, let me tell you, the exercises are very straightforward and very simple. And they're quite visual, too. I'll show you a little bit of that in a moment. And then once a week, we'll also have a synchronous meeting. And this is optional. I'm not requiring you to attend this in case your circumstances don't allow you to. We need to stay pretty flexible. But I recommend you come. I call this a QA&D, so question, answer, and discussion. We'll have a little bit of structured discussion, but mostly, we'll figure it out as we go. So let's dig into these bullets more. We'll have 2 to 3 lectures per week, like I said, and these will all be uploaded on my YouTube channel. And there will be a Blackboard quiz associated with each one. They'll be short, somewhere in the range of 5 questions. You have 5 attempts, so, you have lots of wiggle room to try it out and see if you're getting the content or not. But beware, because only the final attempt is kept. So if you're just planning to brute force it, it's not gonna work out well for you. So, the approach is you don't have to worry about it. You don't only get one shot, but if you take it a couple of times and you're really not getting through the quiz and understanding all the content, go back, go consult the PDFs of the lectures and maybe go back to the video, that kind of thing. So it's designed to help you process what you've been looking at on the screen, right? So, okay. We also will have QAD meetings, like I said. So question, answer, and discussion. These are optional, like I said before, but they're a good chance to really get the engagement part of the class going. A lot of this will be a little more disconnected this semester than we might be used to, and it's nice to come and interact, right? It's also, it's low stress. It's a discussion. It's not necessarily going to be heavy duty, and like I said, it's optional. So things you might want to bring to these segments, though. Questions that you might want clarifications on from lecture. Sometimes things might go over your head just a little bit, and you just write it down, right? Write down a note if you're like, what is he talking about? I don't quite get this part. Write it. We'll talk about it in person. Well, not in person, but questions or help about the assignments. Now these will be in this class. These will be very short, but you still might need help. I mean, this is your first step into a brand new mode of thought. So programming. So we'll be there for that. But also thoughts on the discussion questions you hit from lecture. We'll see some of those as we go. So there'll be one of those at the end of every lecture. That's how I mean it. So we can also talk about programming assignments. So this is the Gargoyle program and the Clay programming language. This is developed by Dr. Gracie. He's the COG program director. And it's this program that's basically designed to let you make non-representational art using very simple programming language. For example, we can look at the above on the right. There's the word move and paint. See that? The first word means move wherever the pointer is. The second word is saying paint. It'll just make a black dot. Now, I can collect those two different concepts to move the pointer somewhere and then paint onto where that pointer is located. I can program those into this function. Dot is move paint. So if I say dot, it'll automatically do both move and paint. So now if we do 30 dot in this language, that means move paint 30 times. Very straightforward, I think, but it touches on some big ideas, which we'll talk about as we go. And it creates this output image, right here it's fairly simple, but you can get kind of nutty with it if you want. This is something I developed when I was learning the language. It's just a sort of a scattering of different sized dots, but you see some structure there. You see some... It's interesting. I told a computer how to create this image using words. And that's programming. That's all programming, honestly. That's how your computer runs. That's how almost all your appliances run nowadays. But ultimately, it is programming. It's the idea of moving information around in discrete ways and transforming it and having it do something new. So you will be learning this step by step. You won't get this complex with it, but you'll dive in on these things. There will also be a final exam. It'll also be fully asynchronous. So during finals week, it typically is like you will have most of finals week to decide when you want to take the exam. But once you start it, you'll have about 2 to 4 hours, depending on what we end up doing, in one block. So standard exam. Everything on it will be questions from the lecture quizzes that you've already seen before. Or in addition, a little bit additional stuff of ideas from the programming exercises that we've seen. And there will also be one short essay on a very key question that we will develop as we go. So I should note, this is an asynchronous class, right? For by and large, but I'm here. This isn't one of those big Stanford 20,000 people taking the course, you'll never speak to a human being things, Not that those courses are bad, they're great, but I'm here. This is my full-time job to be here for you. So I'm holding regular office hours. We'll have the weekly discussions, and I can meet anytime you need to. Now, this class doesn't have a huge burden of effort involved in terms of assignments and all that, but it does have, we have a lot of tricky concepts. So if you find yourself kind of looking for more, I'm around. Come knocking. So, although I might be here virtually, I intend to stay very hands-on. Now, on top of that, though, your presence and asynchrony. You're in charge of your own pace in this class. I'm not going to hold you I'm not going to hold your feet to the flame here. And that means you're free to move through the lectures however you want, but this can be tricky because if you start delaying too much, you fall behind, you get all bunched up, and you realize, shoot, I'm not really keeping up with some of this content. So you need to be in charge of this. If you wait until the end of the semester, you know what happens. You get crammed up and you end up having a very bad last week where you're trying to cram for stuff that you could have been doing a bit at a time the entire semester. And I understand this is new territory for many of you. The idea that I want you to get behind, though, is that you need to figure this out. It's not going to be the exact same for everyone. You need to put in the effort to figure out what is your pattern that works. Maybe it's you save them all for Thursday afternoon, right? And just do all of the last week's lectures all at once. That's fine if that works for you. But you need to put in conscious effort to figure these things out. But like I said, I'm here. If you need help considering some of these things and you want to get a little caught up sometimes, I'm around to help out. So really, not in the literal sense, but my door's always open. So please, you are welcome. Okay, so that's syllabus stuff. Let's do a little showcase of some interesting stuff. This would normally be a little more fun in a classroom because we could kind of shout things out and all that stuff. But I'll just try to be a good virtual host instead. So first, pattern matching. Here's an interesting one. You may have seen this before. You're likely able to read this pretty clearly. Not everyone, and maybe not every single word, but most of them, and certainly well enough to get the gist. Your brain doesn't need the words to have lexical integrity because it can fill in the blanks. Whoa, why is that working? Why am I able to read that so quickly? I promise I didn't memorize it. In fact, I haven't looked at this in about 8 months. Your brain is a very powerful pattern matcher. It's able to take all the features of these words, but it's able to kind of find the nearest likely answer for what's actually being printed on the screen, or what's actually being intended, right? These are not words. You can see that. They're almost all wrong. But your brain does a great job of making sense of them anyway. How? Why? Well, maybe we'll find out. Here's an interesting one. Do you see what I see? Okay, the letter A, right? Is the letter A on... It's representing the corner. Is that corner in the foreground or the background? Your brain might be able to make the flip between the two. If it's in the background, the cube is kind of slanting up and to the right. And if it's in the foreground, the cube is kind of slanting down to the left. These are two different stable patterns. They're different stable solutions your brain has for figuring out what is this shape in front of me. Now, we'll dig into detail about some theories about how that works in your brain and mind. But you can see it. Kind of, right? It's flipping. You can flip it back and forth. Now it's in the back. Now it's in the front. And so on. Another example is this dancer. What direction is she spinning? Is she going clockwise or counterclockwise? It can kind of be both, but in this case, it's harder to flip. There's so much momentum going on. And I don't just mean the motion. I mean, there's so much... You are solving this rapidly, continuously. But there are two solutions. Let's see them. You can sort of see she works in both directions. If she's spinning clockwise, the left one is more of a clockwise motion. You see from the outlines, right? These extra details help us fill in all of the blanks to say, I can see which parts of her body are occluding the rest of her. I know the answer. But going back, when it's just a black silhouette, perfectly blank, there's not enough details to show you the truth of which direction she's spinning, because both are possible. Very much like the cube. Here's another one. It's seriously not moving. Here's hoping this shows up on the video, but make sure it's full screen. This is, if you look around, let your eyes kind of scan around the different elements. This is not a GIF. This is a static image. But you start to detect motion every time you move your eyes. Has to do with how your retina works. This is a visual illusion at the eyeball level. It's not something in your brain saying, I'm screwing up. It's your eyes are indicating that there is motion because of some of the ways that they handle light. Sometimes you'll get an impression, an after image, and the colors being dark blue and light yellow, those are opposite colors. So as you scan around, parts of your eyes are lighting up saying, hey, I think something changed, when it's really not, which is just so cool. Another piece we could think about is, think about your memory span. This is a very common laboratory task, the NBAC task. So to measure your working memory capacity, we can make you memorize a short list of things, right? So for this, the 2-back task, when you see each item, you'll say whether it's the same as the item you saw 2 items ago. For example, if I see M and then C and then P and then C, that would be a yes because the C's have been 2 apart. But you only know this because you're memorizing it. You're keeping track of it in mind. Whereas D, R, D, Q would be a no because the R being 2 back, that's not the same as the Q. Now, okay, let's do one. A, Q, A, yes. C, no. D, no. Right? You would then ramp up the N. So that was a 2-back task. And you would ramp it up to figure out how far can you push your working memory? How much can you keep in mind before you start to fail? And once you start to fail, you've reached a point of saying, it looks like my working memory span is somewhere between 7 and 10 items, right? That doesn't mean anything specific. I'm just throwing out random numbers. But the idea being that this is a very cleanly designed laboratory task to help tease apart very specific ways that your memory works. We can also look at learning complex skills. Here's a fun one. This is a video game made for laboratory experimentation called Space Fortress. You do a lot of different things in Space Fortress. You fly a ship, so there's a lot of maneuvering and angling the ship in the correct directions. You try to avoid mines and bullets that are being shot at you by the fortress, the titular fortress. You try to stay on the screen. You try to time your shots. You're trying to memorize information to help you destroy the mines. All kinds of stuff. You are doing lots of things cognitively. That's the point. It's trying to combine a whole lot of atomic cognitive tasks that are quite different from one another to really just overwhelm you. Now, let's look at someone playing Space Fortress. So, here we see the ship is the little Y-shaped critter, whereas this fortress is in the middle trying to shoot it down. You see the plus sign is the fixation cross, so this is actually an eye-tracked video. And you can also see the key presses, so the different buttons that are being pressed. So this is complicated, and man, this person's really sucks. You know, their scores are all negative. They don't know what they're doing. They're spinning around. They don't even know when you cross the boundary of the world, you lose points. Like, just smashing into things. Like, what an idiot. That's me. That's my first time playing Space Fortress. This shows that it is complex. There's a lot going on. I'm certainly not solving all of the tasks set before me, but I'm working on it, you know? I am trying to make sense of the world here. Now, let's look at the last game I ever played. My eyes are centrally located. My key presses are highly stereotyped, very, very sequential, very the same pattern over and over. And you can't even see the bullets. I'm doing them in such rhythm. And this isn't just to flex. I'm not talking about this like look at me, I'm so great at this one weird video game. The point is that humans acquire skills, and there are so many features that allow us to ask questions about how do we get better at these skills. You see that my eyes are staying focused in one spot. How am I using vision now that I am an expert in the game? Quote expert. I wouldn't actually call myself an expert. You play 40 games of this thing, you get pretty good. So we can also analyze everyday tasks in great detail. So actual in the world tasks. There's another eye track video. part of me making coffee in breakfast. You can see where I'm looking. You can see that I'm looking ahead. I'm making use of information in the world. I'm mostly just watching myself fill up the water, but you can see what my eyes are doing. And we can use geometry to tell us where they're pointing. Pouring it in. We can kind of see where I'm looking. Honestly, this is not the best. This was just a demo video. It wasn't really highly organized. So, but we can do this even more with even more complex behavior. So, a friend of mine, John Mathis, you'd be surprised at how complicated walking is. And his whole research program is to investigate how do we use vision to make sense of of the world around us in terms of where we place our feet. So, if you watch this laser skeleton, you can see where its eyes are pointed, and you can see where it's going to place its feet. We do so much work every time we take a step that we don't even think about even a little bit. You don't even have to. It's one of the first things we learn as toddlers, right? But it's a very complex phenomenon. I mean, we've seen the robots that can't even barely stand up. They fall over and break some critical piece. We don't. How? How are we doing that? The number of actuators and muscles in our bodies that we have to engage at all times, even just to stand up like I am now. That's a lot. That's a lot of stuff. And your brain and your subsystems and your neurology are all handling it just fine. The question is, how the heck are we doing that? So that's why people like John get into this work. Talk about AI. I have worked on a AI for Tetris, learning Tetris with AI. Sorry, this is some of that work. So we can watch. This is a little command line artificial Tetris game that an AI system is learning to play. We'll see two different snapshots. One is it learning a very bad way to play Tetris. It's optimizing all the wrong stuff. We'll see. It moves through. It's trying out all the different possibilities, and it decides on a solution. Now, you can see that it's playing Tetris just about the worst way possible. It's making an interesting looking tree, but it's maximizing all the worst ways of handling the game world. It's creating the most empty holes. It's leaving the most overhangs. It's not maneuvering anything into positions that are close together. That's a bad approach to the game. On the other hand, we can create a system that has a quite good approach to the game. Similar pattern here. It's rapidly cycling through possibilities, and it's selecting the best choice. I wouldn't say this thing is as good as a human, but it's certainly more rigid than one, but it's doing pretty good. It solves the game quite well. It tries out different options. It uses rules that it has adapted over several iterations to figure out, okay, this has worked in the past. I'll maximize this. This doesn't work quite so well. I'll minimize this. Also in cognitive science, we can read our own brain waves. Here is an EEG cap reading. I believe this was my own head. I typically use my own videos, but then again, I had a pretty big head. Who knows? This is an EEG system. It's a set of nodes, electro nodes set onto your scalp that can detect what is happening below the surface using electricity. This is now you can tell there's some noise in this. There's a lot of the big stuff is me closing my eyes, right? And muscles are quite loud in EEG world. But the idea is that you can use math to pinpoint the stuff that's going on in between, on the surface of the brain. So, very good stuff. I also know some folks who spend a lot of time watching crows solve puzzles. And not kidding. This is quite fun. So this crow has learned a few things, a few properties of the world. You might not think a crow, a bird, is especially smart, but crows have learned the ability to use tools, something we used to think humans were the only ones to do, maybe some orangutans, but crows can solve complex problems. They can think and come up with theories about, ooh, is this going to be enough to displace the water to get the treat? It's going to go for it. Is that quite high enough? Not really. Which one will I pick? And that's the thing. Crows can learn to pick things that will help them in these tasks based on their properties, which is really cool. Not quite there. That was too small, buddy. You need the big ones. I mean, they still have to learn. We're a little better at learning than they are, but they're... Oh, hey! Who was wrong? Me. Huh. Additional stuff. This crow, again, throwing different bricks in there based on their size and weight and all these things. So it's a great... You should look these videos up. They're quite fun. But yeah, comparing the cognition of some of other species to figure out, you know, what's going to happen. I believe this time he's selecting items that will or won't float. Yeah. And this one he needs to put in the solid objects because the hollow ones won't help. Okay, so that's it. That's a whole lot of interesting little tidbits of the world of cognition and the world of cognitive science. The philosophy of the mind and the self is at the heart of this science, which is, you know, that's what really draws me into it personally. We get to ask these questions about our own minds. You know, how do we think? How do we process things? How do we function? What are our capabilities? What are the rules of how brains work? And it's all these different subfields come together to ask all these interesting overlapping questions. So the introspection can be a little challenging. It can kind of kick your butt once in a while when you are really caught in a loop thinking about thinking, right? But I just think it's pretty dang cool. So a final thought. We'll have these at the ends of lectures to try and spark discussions as needed. And it's actually something I already asked you. What are you? All right. Take care. I'll see you next time.